Hey everyone. I want to do another quick review video for your final. It is very, very similar to your first test that you took. So same format, same breakdown of questions. And so I would say, as we start this review, familiarize yourself with why the Great Wall of China was built, where it was built, and specifically what invaders it was to keep out. The Chinese dynasty at this time was threatened by the Mongols, and so that was one of the main reasons why the wall was built. Um, Familiarize yourself with Otto von Bismarck, his place in German society, what was his nickname, what great treaties he got done, especially being Napoleon III. Um, look back at the philosophers of the Enlightenment, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. Um, Remember that in the argument of the state of nature, right? What is the state of nature? State of nature is society before we make governments, right? People living in nature and what that type of life was like. Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke all had many, many different views on what this was. What was life before civil society? Do the laws of a society reign in evil or evil people? Reign in? Does society make human beings bad or good? Now, our three main thinkers have very, very different ideas on that. So, all of them during this time, coming out of the Renaissance and the new sciences, are asking questions on why people obey governments. To what extent should we obey that government? What is absolutism and divine right, meaning that power rests in uh, the divine right of kings, right? Kings are actually chosen by God to rule. And quickly to go over Hobbes, he is our cynic. Hobbes believed that people make governments out of fear, and to a state at all costs should avoid chaos. Deeply peaceful man, but the English Civil War and the violence that followed deeply influenced his thinking. His definitive work would be the Leviathan. And the change comes in terms of when people should stop obeying a ruler is when that ruler kills its own citizens. On the other end of the spectrum would be Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the philosopher who believed that society is actually what made people evil. Life is addicted to progress, that we actually go from savagery to civilization and prosperity. The question to him was, is the world getting better? Hence, is technology destabilizing our world, destabilizing our democratic processes, destabilizing our society? Civilization did not improve people, but made people become incredibly competitive. Instead of being true to who they are in their base nature, they become competitive. They make their ideals based in relation to others. We stop living in a sense of humanity with the natural world. And that the real people, i.e. around this time, who greatly influenced Rousseau was the discovery of the Native American people, right? Europe has been experiencing massive growth. And when Columbus makes connection with the Americas, the realization or the fact that these people are brought back to Europe and they live in a much, much peaceful coexistence relationship with nature, with animals, with each other, that modern society, modern European society, is actually not making people better. So we have Hobbes on the one side, very, very cynical, thinking that people in and of themselves are evil and that we should make governments to avoid fear, chaos, and that life is in and of itself brutish and nasty without governments. The other end is arguing that governments are making people bad. It's making us competitive. It's debasing our nature by us reading a newspaper, right? Just reading bad news about the world and putting us in a certain state of mind. Then we have our middle person, who would be John Locke. John Locke is the famous philosopher who greatly influenced the American Declaration of Independence and Thomas Jefferson. Locke's idea of the social contract was, it wasn't as bad as what Hobbes says. It wasn't as good as what Rousseau says. It's a combination in the middle. It's not great, but it's not bad. It's not the best thing in the world. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's somewhere in the middle, and we give up certain rights to make life better. And so Locke's idea was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. I would also familiarize yourself with what was FDR's plan to get the society back to out of the Great Depression. What was the name of it? Remember the New Deal. The New Deal is the economic plan by the FDR administration to get the United States economy going. And that Great Depression led to the rise of dictators in and around the world. Most notably, the Great Depression destabilized not only the American economy, but also the European economy, leading to Mussolini and Hitler. Familiarize yourself with the Taj Mahal as well, and the Mongol Empire. Now, for short definitions, I would familiarize yourself with who Queen Elizabeth was, Christopher Columbus, King Ferdinand, Simon Bolivar, Karl Marx, the Western Front, what the New Deal is, the Glorious Revolution, right? The first time in European tradition, divine right of kings was curbed. The Glorious Revolution is an incredibly important revolution when power starts to be taken from the king and put into parliament, into the representatives of the people. Know who the Harlem Hellfighters were during World War I, the African-American regiment that gained fame on the Western Front where the trenches were in World War I. Know what the guillotine was, what war it was used in. Know who Hidalgo was and his place in Mexican history. Terms like imperialism, colonialism, secret alliances, militarism, know those terms, know what the Council of Vienna was, know great explorers like Henry Hudson, Marco Polo, Christopher Columbus. Let me see, understand what who was the leader of the Jacobean French Revolution, Maximilien Robespierre. Know what the Passion Play was, especially during the Renaissance, what play they were putting on, and what is the story of the Passion Play. Know what the Protestant Reformation was, the Catholic Reformation, and the split of the Catholic Church, and why it happened. For your essays, I would recommend deep diving on the institution of slavery. Now, we've asked questions on the difference between slavery in the old world and the new world, but another focus might be, why did it take so long to actually get rid of it? It wasn't a moment of enlightenment where people realized that this institution was inhumane or unhumanitarian. We know this. People found slavery to be very awful and immoral, both in Africa and in the New World. But the institution would persist for centuries in the Atlantic world, in places like Brazil, in the Americas, and in the United States. We fight a war over it. Why do we think the United States went to war over the institution of slavery, like the true American Revolution, which is a civil war? I would say economic basis of the institution for the United States, and combined with racism, racializing it, and having awful racist ideas in the United States, which made the institution persist for a long time. Also in places like Brazil, they depended on it for labor, especially when Brazil switched from sugar to coffee. And it turned out to be incredibly hard to dismantle. It wasn't an easy institution to get rid of. Um, so we know that slavery persisted so long in the United States for economic reasons and racial reasons, combined with commodities that the world wanted, tobacco, and then eventually cotton. And so it began with fertile land to expand westward. So we have people who are making a lot of money that want to continue to make a lot of money off the institution, off free labor living in the South, and they were willing to fight a war over it. In South America, most notably Brazil, in the 1830s and 40s, Brazil makes the transition from sugar to coffee as a major commodity, but both require slave labor. British warships started to intercept slave ships in 1849 to cease the importation of slavery. So even with the world economy trying to stop the flow of slaves, Brazil still did not want to get rid of it. So sugar, cotton, coffee plantation owners began to think of ridding themselves of a monarchy that was unable to maintain the flow of slaves overseas. So we see Brazil going through this moment of thinking about a actual governmental change because the monarchy couldn't supply the slave owners with a labor force. 1860s, not coincidental that we've gone from the Haitian Revolution into the American Civil War. Now it's kind of spreading around the world in South America. An anti-slavery movement increased in the country as the country became isolated in the world on this particular issues. Then we see, after the persistence of it for a very long time, planters started encouraging immigrants to come to Brazil. And we see a change to a wage labor system, first on the coffee plantations, and then in 1888, the central government of Brazil ended slavery. Although freed, they received no land from the government for previous work. They were not educated. They weren't given urban jobs, and many stayed, like in the United States, in the South, on the coffee plantations and did low wage paying jobs. And so opportunity was kind of restricted to those people. So know why the institution persisted, know why wars were fought over it, how it became the basis of the new world economy. And it proved to be incredibly difficult to dismantle. For one, especially in the United States, we use the law to back it up, right? Law can be very biased and can reflect the needs of those making the laws. And in the United States, we had a lot of lawyers who were also slave owners making laws to protect the institution. Now, in terms of World War I, know how these isms brought about World War I. Militarism, imperialism, colonialism, nationalism, also alliances and revolution. Now, militarism, simply put, the building up of armies. We have Germany building up their army, and Russia is building up their army. Germany's building up this navy, which has threatened the navy of England. England tries to match the German building up of their navy. So we have militaristic competition. We have an arms race happening at the turn of the century, inspired by imperialistic urges of European countries, the Americas as well, to take over places around the world with the desire to kind of make money off them, influence their economy as well. Also, nationalism. We see, combined with revolution, desire for self-determination, and nationalism, places like the Balkans would go through these moments of massive, sorry about that. We see the belief after some failed socialist revolutions in Europe, the kind of eroding away of divine right and faith in divine right as these countries industrialized, like Germany, England, and France. So we see people around the world starting to want more self-determination. In Ireland, in the Balkans, they'll have their revolutions. Also, the big revolution, the Russian Revolution, under the Bolsheviks during the First World War. And this nationalism of pride in one's nation and culture and to rule oneself will be on the increase. Also, it will lead to World War I's major war, as in Austro-Hungarians and the Germans and the Russians not wanting to look weak in front of the other one, right? Russians thinking that they're really strong, i.e. the Germans do as well, and neither one wants to back down. And so eventually a powder keg explodes. Now, colonialism, the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically. We see this happening around the world. In the United States, we go into the Caribbean. England is going into India. In the Middle East, Africa is starting to be colonized by Germany, Italy. We'll go into the Mediterranean region. And so we see European powers trying to gain a foothold in the developing world over their European counterparts. Now, alliances as well, if would be a cause of the First World War. Secret alliances between the ruling parties, the ruling classes, right? It's not an open system of government, right? We have the Kaiser, who believes that he doesn't have an obligation to tell the people of Germany exactly what's going on, i.e. the same for George and Tsar Nicholas, right? They're also family members. They're just dealing with their issues internally. So the idea of not having an open forum, like let's say the Council of Vienna, which kind of disbanded after the next French Revolution, in around the time that Germany is unifying. The Council of Vienna was a place where the European powers could come together, work out their differences, have meals together, talk about the nuts and bolts of politics. That disbands, and we see secret alliances coming back, and eventually those secret alliances with a domino effect after the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. We now today have the UN as an open place to do international politics, where the world population tunes in and can understand what the relationship is between, let's say, Germany and Russia. For another cause of the First World War, revolution, i.e. the Balkan Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the Irish Revolution, desire for self-determination increasing around the world. There will be a question on the U.S. Constitution. With the Constitution, I want everyone to realize or remember that the Constitution of the United States is inspired by the fact that the first Article of Confederation was not working. They had to remake it. The compromises that will be kind of worked out would be how to balance federal and state governments in the interests of small states and large states. The two plans that will come out, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, would influence the final structure of the Great Compromise in the Constitution. Virginia plan wanted citizens to be counted as one towards representation in the House of Representatives. The Senate, right, it calls for the proposal of a two-house. Virginia plan is two-house based on the state's population, with the state's population determining representation and needs. States feared that the more populous states, Virginia, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, would dominate the new government over Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, the smaller states. It will come back with the New Jersey plan. New Jersey plan called for a single house where each state casts one vote, same as the Articles of Confederation. The compromise that was reached was a two-house Congress consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. That's our bicameral Congress, Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate, everybody gets two representatives, no matter how big or how small. representation in the House of Representatives will be based on state population. The next compromise that came out was how we count the enslaved population, meaning what do we do with the enslaved people? Do they count? Do they not count? The North wanted them counted as 0. If they're not going to be full citizens, you can't actually count them towards a representation. They do not have a voice. The South wanted them counted as 1. So the 3/5 compromise would come up with the compromise to count some of the enslaved population. Now, it wasn't taking a person and cutting them off at the knees. It was taking the 3/5 number of the total number of slaves in a state. You're taking 3/5 of that number and putting it towards a state's representation, which meant that, i.e., the first 16 presidents, we'd have 4, all but 4 would be from a slaveholder South family. And so the 3/5 clause would also allow the fugitive slave clause. So the South gave up the desire to count them as 1. They'll count them as 3/5, but they wanted a federal law guaranteeing in states like Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, which were had abolished slavery, that if one of the slaves from the South got to those places in the North, by federal law, they have to be brought back. So one of the compromises would be 3/5 clause with how we would count the enslaved population. And so, to a point, the U.S. Constitution has slavery written into the document. It doesn't say the word slave. It kind of alludes to it, but it's there. It's there in some of the laws that was actually counted. That will then lead us to the another one, which is how the Electoral College would be used to choose the president of the United States. So the president was to be chosen not by direct democracy, i.e., the people voting for the person with the most votes. It's going to be done by electoral points, right? You have to get a certain number of points to win the presidency. So you could win the popular vote, but lose the Electoral College, and we've seen that happen fairly recently a couple of times. But the Electoral College was an indirect means to elect the president because the delegates did not trust ordinary voters to choose the president and vice president directly. So we are then given electors who we vote to influence their election in December. We vote in November. We're telling our electors, we would like you to vote for this candidate. They vote in December, and then the election is certified in that January. We have arguments against, right? The possibility of electing a minority, the risk of so-called faithless electors, the possibility of the Electoral College in a depressing voter turnout, meaning why would I vote? My vote doesn't matter, and its failure to accurately reflect the national popular will. An argument for is beware tyranny of the majority, right? It's trying to spread democracy. Now, it doesn't seem like, it seems like an indirect means, right? We're taking away the popular vote, but what about those people that don't live in those places that are populous, right? What happens to their say? So we're putting points out there, making candidates go there and listen to those needs and wants of those people. So it's beware the tyranny of the majority. It's giving small states a voice in democracy. Also, the Electoral College helps give rural states with a lower population a voice, make candidates visit, preserves federalism, balance between federal and state power, and also it allows for, or one of the other arguments is it's also, for the most part, throughout our history, it's been pretty much reflective in a good way. Federalism, know that it is the balance of power between, it's a system of checks and balances and divisions of power between the different branches of the national government, the Congress, the Senate, the Congress, the judiciary, and the executive, the legislative, judiciary, and executive. Second. There will be a question on the Great Depression. Know that the Great Depression is caused by a number of reasons, the most famous one being the Great Crash in 1929, the stock market crash in New York City. But also note that there were long-term causes that were eroding in the 1920s. We had land remaining underdeveloped in the Midwest. We had mortgages foreclosing in places like Arkansas. Banks started failing. We had a massive real estate speculation. Small town banks were putting their money into everything, i.e. housing, businesses, speculation on the stock market. And so when people's money were invested in everything, none of the money was actually in the bank. So we had a weak banking system. We also had European demand for American goods start to decline in the mid-1920s after their industry recovered from the war. And then we also have major industries like cotton, that was a focal point of Southern economy, start to lose its power and economic power to synthetic materials in the North. We also have coal in the Midwest, in the West Virginia region, being replaced by electricity and other means of producing energy. And when the stock market failed, mainly the German economy defaulted on its payment to the Treaty of Versailles. From the Treaty of Versailles, the German Guild Clause, and so that failure to pay their loan resulted in France not being able to pay the United States, England as well, and then eventually Germany defaulting on its loan, plunging the world economy and the European economy and the American economy into the Great Depression. And another reason, so as I mentioned, cotton industry is going to be affected by the rise of synthetic materials, railroad industry affected by cars and airplanes, passenger miles would decrease overall from 47 million to 34 in 1927. We are overproducing goods, but spending less on goods. So we have underconsumptions. Our warehouses were full of unsold products. Then we have a restriction of our immigration laws due to the Red Scare in the 1920s, and immigrants are customers. So as we started to slide into a recession into a depression, we didn't have anybody there to actually buy our products. Then we have a weak international economy, mainly by the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which created the highest tariffs in U.S. history. Know that one of the reasons why we went into the Great Depression wasn't just the stock market crash. We had major industries being replaced by other new technologies, massive speculation on the stock market. Little is now, you can put down that 5% down in the hopes that the stock would rise. And then also internationally, the Hawley-Smoot tariff created the highest tariff in U.S. history, and 23 nations retaliated by imposing taxes on U.S. exports. So we hit Europe we hit the world with the tariff, and the world hit us back with the tariff. On top of that, another cause is Hoover. The U.S. federal government did nothing to stymie the fall. Today, we have the Biden administration putting money into the economy, right? Inflation, trying to make sure that there's money in the economy. But for one, the Hoover administration thought that the free market would correct itself, right? We've seen the market kind of shudder before. They thought that eventually the market would just self-correct and come back. Now, they do nothing. They're not getting involved in private businesses, telling businesses to stop laying off workers. They don't do any public programs such as eventually what the FDR administration does. They will at the end. We will see the Hoover Dam kind of lead the way to the government-led programs to get people back to work. But for the main majority of the Great Depression, the Hoover administration was just hoping that the market would correct itself. We have 25% of the labor force is out of work with no unemployment benefits from the state. So people, once they were out of work, had no money coming in. They would have been had to foreclose on their homes. Mortgages would actually decrease, leading to massive amounts of homelessness. We have our low-skilled workers being affected the most. African Americans and immigrant workers were fired first, hired last, and fired first. And then eventually we have wages dropping due to deflation from 12 billion to 7 billion in 3 years, resulting in child labor increasing. So what were some of the causes of the Great Depression? One, weak banking system. Two, major industries being replaced by new technologies. The railroad industry by cars and airplanes, the cotton industry by synthetic materials, the coal industry being replaced by electricity. And then on top of that, the administration of Hoover did nothing to stymie it. And then the Depression, although impacted the United States the most out of all the industrial countries, we got FDR, which was like left-wing socialism with the New Deal, and the nations of Europe went internal. They would regiment their societies. They would try to become very, very self-sufficient in a militaristic sort of way, most notably with fascism under Mussolini and National Socialism under Adolf Hitler. They will regiment their societies and kind of go inward. Another question to look at would be what began the cultural change in Europe in the 1400s with the Renaissance? How did the new sciences and the Enlightenment, as I mentioned before, these new thinkers, right? Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Descartes, combined with the new sciences of Newton and Galileo and Copernicus. You could throw Shakespeare in there as well. Lay the foundation for the scientific and industrial societies of today. How did these ideas, right? We go from a society coming out of the Black Plague to one that changes in terms of how central religion is to the society, divine rights of kings, to one of a representative democracy based on Enlightenment thought and the rule of law. So I would say, look for reasons for the cultural change that began in Europe with the Renaissance around 1400 and what the new sciences and Enlightenment did for the foundation of the scientific and industrial societies we know today. If you stay close to what we mentioned here, you should do very well on the final. For those that do not, that won't be there, that are out of town, I am figuring out a way to get the test done online. So just remain calm. I'm trying to get a lot of things done one at a time, but we will get to it. It's on my mind.